Hi, so what we're going to go over today is information regarding the urinary system. I just want to touch on some major functions of this system and some internal anatomy of the kidneys and structure that are found in there and their functions. So let's start off with three major functions of the urinary system. The first one is that it regulates volume, composition, and the pH of bodily fluids. The second is that it secretes metabolic waste in the form of urine. And the third major function is it regulates blood pressure, red blood cell production, and it performs gluconeogenesis. Now, gluconeogenesis is a pathway used by the body to create glucose from other molecules. This is so important because this basically allows our body to store needed energy for the brain in the form of glucose. So it's really important, and it's crazy what our body can do. Okay, so our urinary system is made up of two kidneys, two ureters, your bladder, and your urethra. The kidneys can be found within the muscular wall of the back, specifically between T12 and L3 vertebrae. The kidneys contain three important connective tissue layers, so I'd like to go over that with you. The first layer is known as the renal fascia, and what this does, this is considered the outer layer, and what this does is anchors the kidneys in place. The second or middle layer is known as the adipose capsule, and this is the the kidney shock absorber. And then the third or the inner layer is known as the renal capsule, and what this does is isolates the kidneys and protects them from bacteria. Okay, so I have a picture of a kidney cut in half so that we can see the internal anatomy of a kidney. There's important structures and kind of some important things that are going on here. Okay, so let's look at this first structure, which is this light outer portion, and this is known as the renal cortex. And the renal cortex contains most of the kidney's nephrons, and a nephron is the functional unit of a kidney. A nephron is so important, and we'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute. There's also three important hormones that are produced by the cortex, the renal cortex, and they are aldosterones produced there, cortisol's produced there, and we have the hormone, androgen hormones are produced there. The middle part of a kidney is known as the renal medulla, and there's some important structures there that we need to know. Each kidney has, within the medulla, has several what they're called renal pyramids. These triangular shaped structures here are renal pyramids, and those are made up of a collecting duct system, and those aid in filtering urine. At the tips of each pyramid, or the ends of each pyramid, we have a structure called a renal papilla. Now, urine is not always called urine. When it is going through lots of changes and processes and things are being reabsorbed from the body and it's being filtered, it is called filtrate, and filtrate is raw urine. It's derived from plasma. But once it goes through the pyramids and it drips off of the papilla into the minor calyxes, which are these structures here, it is then called urine. Nothing else can be changed. It's done being filtered. It's ready to be transferred to the bladder via the ureter and then stored there until it's ready to be excreted out of the body. So I mentioned we have our minor calyxes. If you go further down, when two minor calyxes come together, it's known as a major calyx. This is our renal pelvis. We have our hilum here. Okay, this is where our blood vessels enter and exit out of, as well as our ureter. Okay. So I mentioned a few minutes ago that within our renal cortex we find our nephron, which is the functional unit of a kidney. So we're going to go over nephron anatomy now. So a nephron is made up of our renal corpuscle and our renal tubules. So let's look at our renal corpuscle. Our renal corpuscle is made up of different structures. These structures are, number one, we have a glomerulus, and a glomerulus is basically a ball of fenestrated capillaries. Fenestrated capillaries means leaky capillaries. This is where we find our efferent and afferent arterioles, okay? Our afferent arterioles brings blood into the glomerulus. Our efferent arterioles brings blood out. We also find a Bowman's capsule here. And what a Bowman's capsule does is catches filtrate that has been leaked out, and then it sends it down the proximal convoluted tubule. And we'll get into that in just a minute. There's two important layers of a Bowman's capsule. The first layer is the parietal layer, and this is made up of simple squamous epithelium. And then we have our second layer, which is known as our visceral layer, and this is made up of podocytes, these like star-shaped structures. And these podocytes have projections, there's lots of podocytes, and each one has several projections that branch off of it, and those projections are called pedicels. And what pedicels do is form filtration slits. So this is just extra help in filtering the plasma that's been leaked out of the capillaries. Let's see, we have a capsular space. The capsular space is found between the glomerulus and the visceral layer, and this is just an area filled with filtrate. Okay, so let's get on to our renal tubules. So I have another picture to try to help us better understand of location and all that. So we just talked about our glomerulus and our Bowman's capsule. Right, here's our afferent arterial, our afferent arterial and our efferent arterial. So our proximal convoluted tubule, this is the first tube past the glomerulus. This tube does a lot of important things. Its major function is to reabsorb the good stuff. So I would like to go over what all these good things are that it reabsorbs from the body and how it does it. So first, we have reabsorption of sodium, glucose, amino acids, and important vitamins. And it does this by active transport via ATP. It absorbs small proteins by pinocytosis. It absorbs chloride ions and bicarbonate ions, and it does this through passive transport. It absorbs, it picks up urea. It doesn't really want urea, but it picks it up in the process, and it does this by diffusion. And then it reabsorbs water, and this is done by osmosis. So our next stop is our loop of Henle, and our loop of Henle has a descending limb and an ascending limb. Now, it's also referred to as a nephron loop. There's two names to it. It has two segments. It has a thin segment which dips into the medulla, and the thick segment is found in the cortex. And the function of a nephron loop or loop of Henle is it reabsorbs water, sodium. Let's see, the descending limb is freely permeable to water but not salt. The ascending limb is impermeable to water and permeable to sodium and chloride. Okay, then we have our distal convoluted tubule, right? So proximal convoluted, so glomerulus, okay, out pumps into the proximal convoluted tubule, down the loop of Henle or nephron loop, and then into our distal convoluted tubule. And our distal convoluted tubule has an important structure known as principal cells. And these principal cells are targets of aldosterone. And what this does is allows aldosterone to reabsorb sodium. So basically, the distal convoluted tubule reabsorbs sodium, but it's mediated by aldosterone. Let's see. Major functions of this, like I said, it reabsorbs sodium. That's mediated by aldosterone. It has selective reabsorption of sodium and bicarbonate ion. And then we have it. Then it branches off into our collecting duct system, which reabsorbs urea. So these are our basic structures that I really wanted to touch base on within the kidney, what they do. Next, I kind of just want to go over the how the kidney, a brief overview of how the kidney filters blood and ultimately turns it into urine. So we have step one. A large artery brings blood into each kidney. This artery is known as the renal artery. Okay, then tiny blood vessels branch off of this main artery and pass through part of each nephron. So they branch off and go up into the cortex and pass through each nephron. Then water and other small substances such as glucose, salts, amino acids, and urea are forced out of the blood vessels and into the nephrons. As these substances flow through the nephron, most of the water and some nutrients are moved back into the blood vessels that wrap around the nephrons. A concentrated mixture of waste material is left behind in the nephron. The cleaned blood, which has slightly less water and much less waste material, leaves the kidney in a large vein, which we know as the renal vein, to recirculate in the body. The yellow fluid that remains in the nephron is called urine. Actually, it would be called filtrate because it's still being processed. So, and then the filtrate leaves the kidney as urine through a slender tube called the ureter and flows into the urinary bladder, which is where it's stored. And then the urine leaves the body through another tube called the urethra and excreted out of the body. So I hope that what I talked about was just a brief overview of some important structures and things that you need to know about a kidney, functions of the urinary system, and hopefully this helps in your learning process. Thanks so much.